Is it better the other way, though?
No, it's way better.
Is it better now? Okay. Okay.
That's how we should start it.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, honestly, let's start, and then we'll talk about the stuff at the end, and I'll decide if to take it out or not.
Okay. But don't forget, it sounded like it was going to be fun.
Oh, it'll be fun, but it's about what to read next.
Okay.
But yeah, cool. So yeah, back to Rothbard.
Yeah. So this week was more of a history lesson.
Yes.
And I don't know if you agree or don't agree with the history.
I mean, it happened. So this is the interesting thing is, because, so we're talking about Murray Rothbard's The Case Against the Fed. This is the second episode. We're doing the 50 to 100 pages, basically.
Yeah.
From page 50 to 100. Mm-hmm. And then we'll do the last third next episode.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, this was a history lesson. And I don't know. I mean, it was about what led up to the Fed's creation. Mm-hmm. So it was all about the 19th century banking and all the things that led to the development of the central bank and the gold standard in the U.S. And then right up to 1913.
A little bit about inflation.
A little bit about inflation and what banking, fractional reserve banking and everything like that. And yeah, so, I mean, I don't think he said anything like that wasn't true, but it is interesting, and we've talked about this before, how history really is just a perspective.
Right.
And I've read this history many times from different people, Ron Chernow being one person who wrote about this history in his Rockefeller book and his Warburg book. So each of those obviously taking a different perception, and then also, of course, read about this history in conspiracy theory, books, and also Thomas. There's a Theodore Roosevelt biography that I read. So anyway, the point is, though, that I don't know. I just wasn't as convinced by his perspective that these were the things that coalesced into the Federal Reserve. Let me addendum that, though, because obviously, like J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers and Knuth and Loeb, I think that's their name, the bankers, were all involved, but in terms of exactly how they were involved.
So what would you say he's saying coalesced into the Federal Reserve, and then what are you saying you don't agree with?
He's saying that the basically just the Roosevelts. Why do I keep saying the Roosevelts? The Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgan camps were the only two big groups that were pushing for the central bank and Federal Reserve.
Right.
Whereas I think there were more people, but of course, for all I know, if I mentioned these people, he would be like, "Oh, well, they were in this camp." I just was sort of,
So you see it as he's
name.
Maybe oversimplifying the matter.
Yes, because he hasn't even talked about the Warburgs, and again, the federal. But maybe we haven't gotten there yet. But it's like Paul Warburg was the architect of the Federal Reserve, and he hasn't mentioned him once yet. Which I find kind of interesting. Yeah. So he was associated with the Loeb firm.
Right. But it looks like Warburg is coming.
He is? Okay, cool.
Yeah. I get to page 107, and there he is.
I mean, but that's interesting that it's like he was involved in these stages.
It's the chapter, The Central Bank Movement Revives in 1906.
Right, okay. So maybe, but, again, it's the fact that there were a lot of, and by the way, let me just say, I'm not talking about just the, what's their names, the Rothschilds or anything like that, but there were a lot of European groups that were pushing for central bank and the Federal Reserve in the U.S. But anyway, because he hasn't really talked about the Rothschilds and the Noble group, because the Noble, or Alfred Nobel, the oil tycoon, right? He was financed by the Rothschilds, whereas then you had the Rockefellers over in, so they were like kind of the European oil magnates,
right?
And they were pushing for all sorts of things in the U.S. as well, and So anyway, it's just interesting. But like I said, I completely agree with a lot of what he said. And I noticed, one specific part in there that you had actually mentioned before when we were talking about how government creates monopolies, actually. He was making that point because he was saying how J.P. Morgan, essentially, who made his money, the Morgan family essentially made a lot of their money from the railroad industry. And he was wanting to basically make a lockout competition, with the railroads by involving the government to make a monopoly.
Yes,
that was your point. I think you had made previously. Whereas I feel like when I read or I should say listened to, if I'm being completely honest, when I listened to the Rockefeller book on Audible. We should be
.com.
I don't know. Maybe it's .net.
If there is a podcast they sponsor, this one would make sense.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. I've listed a bunch of their books that they have on there.
Yeah, come on.
All the Chernow books are on there.
Audible.app.
But we'll tell people it's audible.net because they aren't sponsoring us.
What if that's a really bad website that you shouldn't go to?
Yeah, don't go there, though. Just assume that it's that. No, just kidding. But anyway, I thought it was primarily the Rockefellers that had pushed for the trust for the same reason of trying to, obviously block out competition.
Right.
But in the Rockefeller biography, they had put him as the central sort of person who was navigating that, where, of course, here, Rothbard's putting J.P. Morgan and the government as the central actors that caused that to happen.
Right.
We know that it got caused, right? There were trusts that were formed in the railroads in the 19th century.
Right.
But who caused it is going to be whoever, can make the case work for whatever they're trying to prove. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. I'll shut up.
But
what do you think, though?
You don't have to shut up. But
it was a long-winded rant.
What do I think? I think that the reason I was asking you about what you thought Rothbard was saying and what you disagreed with was because I think you've read more. You have all those biographies about stuff from this time, which is interesting. So I feel like you probably have a wider range of historical knowledge of these people and what they were up to at the time.
Yeah, maybe I don't know, but
I mean, it's always interesting. Basically, what I took away from it was talking about the history of fractional reserve banking. Interestingly, when he was talking about the Dutch bank,
right
up until the late 18th century, not practicing fractional reserve banking, and then switching over. That was an interesting idea that there were major banks in Europe not practicing fractional reserve banking up until the beginning of the 1800s, when it seems like a lot of this stuff is kicking off. And then the history of the political divisions about banking and sound money in the U.S. being fought over the course of the 1800s.
Do you remember why he said they didn't practice fractional reserve banking? Is it because they just all thought that it would lead to runaway inflation?
I don't know if he said that the Dutch bank thought that it would or it wouldn't.
I'm not
sure.
Either.
I guess I would be interested in talking to Mr. Rothbard, Murray, about this, about whether or not he thinks that it's intentional. Like, those who develop central banks are sort of cynically lying about inflation, and actually they just want a system that pools all the wealth at the top end near them. Or it's a situation where they are honestly just wrong about monetary policy from Rothbard's perspective.
Right.
I don't know, because I was reading a little bit about the what was that act called? The Peels Act of 1844, and then the just some of the movements at the time. And it seems like there was a lot of argument from different economists about what different things would do, and about how fractional reserve banking is a perfectly fine thing to do because it builds an economy. And I guess I don't fully understand the argument for fractional reserve banking. I understand the arguments for centralizing a currency. So like when they're talking about how one of the portions of the Peers Act of 1844 in Great Britain was that it made it illegal for any bank other than the central bank to print currency. So currency can only come from the central bank. And we have the same thing today with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the only organization allowed to print legal tender. And that's part of a monetary theory about inflation.
Do you want to? Yeah.
What were you saying?
Well, I was going to say, should we talk about the Peel Act more and like what it? Because I think you're right. Or I'm wondering should we explain the progression of what led to fractional reserve banking?
Sure.
Because he sort of describes that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seemed like we got this a little bit, but before at the last episode. But it seems like the big reason that people started doing fractional reserve banking, is to make more money.
Right.
Cynically, you can say that, or you can say, like we said, is that you are borrowing against yourself in the future. So you're creating more capital because you know that it'll get returned tenfold in the future.
Right. Or you think it will, at least.
Well, yeah, but yes, from prior experience, we have been increasing the economy. Goods, like the physical economy, not just the monetary stuff, it has grown exponentially because of our productivity. And so it's a question of, did we supercharge it by allowing ourselves to basically create wealth that we would then pay ourselves back with in the future? Credit, basically,
maybe.
Right?
Yeah, credit.
Well, I don't know, because again, it's like talking about the company on a smaller scale than an economy, looking at the singular company.
Right.
Every company does need to borrow in order to jumpstart. I don't know of any. I mean, I'm sure there's companies that have started outright with just. But again, somebody's injecting a lump sum of cash.
But they hold the liability. I feel like with the key difference in what he's talking about, the banking system versus a new company, is if you take out a loan, you are borrowing against your future, but you're also risking your future as well.
Yes.
And the fractional reserve banking system as it stands with the backing of a central bank is basically not risking its future. The only people at risk are those it's lending money to.
Or that are lending money to the bank.
Because it's lending money that it either doesn't have or doesn't exist.
That's why I feel like the people that are actually at risk are the ones with money in the bank.
Right.
But it doesn't
what
really
I'm saying
matter,
is that the bank has no risk because it's not lending anything that it even owns or is real. So if you get a credit card from a bank, that credit isn't real money.
No, but it is risky
until it becomes real money down the line.
No, but it is risky because it's part of their assets, so that they are basically
the credit that it extends isn't part of any assets.
I thought that credit went into the asset branch of a bank.
That's the money it's going to be getting back.
Yeah, and it's an asset because it's generating interest.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's true.
But I don't know. Anyway, I think I get generally what you're saying without getting into sort of the minutia there. Yeah. So your point is that a bank. What? So wait. Actually, okay. So what is your point? Your point is that a bank is
assuming no risk.
Yeah. If it lends money out that it doesn't have, right? If it's basically lending out the 90% of whatever the assets that they own.
Right. It's different than if you put your money in a CD. I mean, if we take federal insurance aside, because that's a whole other complicated thing to add on to it. But if you set up a certificate of deposit, which is essentially you're loaning a bank money for 6 months, they give you some kind of return. And if we ignore federal insurance of all that, because that's a complicated thing, you are in theory taking on the risk of loaning your money out, and in return for that risk, they're paying you interest. But you're not extending the bank credit. You can't extend credit, and essentially what Rothbard is saying is nobody can, other than the fact that a bank does. Because credit is issued through the central bank system.
Oh, yes.
The bank isn't paying. So, when you use credit, the bank is not paying its own dollars when you use your credit card. That's coming from essentially his whole thing, money out of thin air. It's coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is beyond what I understand about the financial system. So,
but it was kind of like his example of if the Federal Reserve or the central bank wants to buy an asset. It wants to buy a property, a house, for $1 million. It just makes that $1 million. Where it gets it is just from itself.
You're sure that's true? Because I honestly
that's what
don't
he
know.
Says. That's what I'm saying. Rothbard is saying. I'm not sure it's true. I didn't get that
impression. I got the impression that you just had to hold. All he was saying is that the bank just had to hold 10% of
that's
what
fractional reserve banking. I'm talking about the credit system.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, okay. Then I missed this part.
Figure 9. Let's see if I can find it again. It's right around there.
Okay.
There's an actual paragraph that I quoted and put on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
I can just read it off my phone.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem when I read early in the week.
Yeah. Okay.
If you want to do that.
Suppose a central bank buys an asset from a bank. So he's setting up a situation where a bank owns a property.
Okay.
And the central bank wants to buy assets so that the central bank can actually own assets. So, for example, the central bank buys a building owned by the Jonesville Bank for $1 million. The building, appraised at $1 million, is transferred from the asset column of the Jonesville Bank to the asset column of the central bank. This is page 65. How does the central bank pay for the building? Simple. By writing out a check on itself for $1 million. Where did it get the money to write out this check? It created the money out of thin air, i.e. by creating a fake warehouse receipt.
That's the central bank.
Yes.
I thought you were saying any bank, sorry.
No. I'm saying the central bank.
Yes.
And our credit system comes from the central bank.
Right.
That's where credit is downstream.
Right. Sorry. I'm on the page with you now. Yes.
Okay.
When you were saying, I thought you were just saying bank, and so I thought you were talking about just any bank.
No.
Yeah, because I was like, any bank can't do that.
No. Some little, your local credit union is not directly creating money out of thin air. The Federal Reserve is directly creating money out of thin air.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
Your local credit union is engaging in the system and making it worse. But
so you're saying that the lower banks still have no risk, or you're saying the central bank?
No, they don't have risk. I mean, they have some risk. They can be taken over like where was that SEC bank?
Yes, exactly. There can still be runs, but the idea then, of course, is that they'll get bailed out.
Right. Well, this is the whole thing about the reason to have a Federal Reserve. He talks about this too.
Right.
Is to mitigate the idea of runs, because runs are the risk,
Yes.
And runs would be the natural
Right.
consequence of banks behaving the way that they do behave.
Right. And it's elasticity, right? So you can all of a sudden make a bunch of money that you need to inject if you find that you have a huge deficit somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Then you just inject.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But there is still risk for the lower banks and people. But I hear what you're saying. That if there's no risk, Rothbard's point is that then you'll get more and more inflation. You have no incentive against making more, and then you inflate away.
And at least on the inflation point, I feel like the proof is everywhere around us, and it's not even just recent. I mean, the devaluation of our currency over the last 200 years is wild.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, did I rant about how I bought a Pop-Tart in the vending machine, and normally there's, from the beginning of time,
you did. Right.
There's 2 Pop-Tarts in a pack.
Yeah.
But this time there's only 1 Pop-Tart for the same price. I mean, if that's not inflation, Antushka, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I know. Oh, what was it? Biden came out and what did he call that? He gave that a name.
Shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation. And he was like, come on, you stupid companies, why are you being so greedy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. The rent's too damn high.
It is too high.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing. That's exactly it. That's like life becomes too expensive for more and more and more people. Except all those people who work for the fucking banks. Yeah. They're fine.
Yeah, no, it's funny because, he was talking about how, like, $50,000 is a tremendous amount of money for the time, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's still a lot of money, but pales compared to what that amount would be now. I don't know, though, still, because... So one thing I was trying to remind myself as I was reading this. So, Rothbard is basically, he's pro-gold standard, right? Because he seemed to be, so he's pro-gold standard. He's an anarcho-capitalist. So he thinks that basically the state shouldn't exist, right? And that every bank should be independent. And basically then they would be incentivized to just have the most assets possible so that if they had a run, then they would be able to... they wouldn't be overextended,
right?
Because
there's also a natural cap on that, where he talks about how cartels are highly inefficient and very difficult to maintain without the backing of the state.
Right. Yes.
Because at a certain point, holding too many assets is going to be too much of a liability.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the whole thing. I get into arguments with people about this. We talked about it last week, I think, about people who say, there shouldn't be billionaires and things like that. And I think that a lot of those types of business practices that create that kind of wealth are very difficult to do, would be very difficult to do in an actually free market system. Maybe not impossible, but much more difficult than they are now.
Yeah, I don't know. Because it's tricky. Because, in some ways, what I kind of feel like anarcho-capitalists are fundamentally against is they're against... stability?
Against stability? I would say, personally, as something close to an anarcho-capitalist, I'm against... the interfering in people's freedom to make contracts and agreements with each other.
Right. I'm being downstream here and saying that ultimately I feel like that leads, because a lot of the arguments, the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of the arguments he was making, especially when talking about the end of the 19th century with the trusts and everything like that, is that he kept making the point of how they were doing this to block out competition, right? They wanted just to be in control. And there's stability in that, in some sense, right? Because if you're constantly jockeying and there's a new sort of big company in town that now we're all, instead of going to Amazon, we have to all go and get passwords at whatever,
right?
And Tushka Mart, because this is the new big online platform that's got lower prices. But then, next week, then it's a new one, and then it's a new one, and because it's run away. And now that is great because it's going to keep prices down, but potentially it'll get exhausting. So you'll have people just settling somewhere that is not necessarily the lowest priced, but it's just like it's the most convenient thing, which again is still a free market thing, of course.
But is that bad? I mean, that's kind of what happens with gas stations, right?
I don't know. I guess here's what I'm saying is I don't know if that would happen.
I'm sure that would happen.
Yeah.
But that, I would say, that happens to a degree. People settle for convenience over lowest price now a lot. I mean, how many people get grocery delivery and stuff now? It's extremely expensive. No, not me.
Extremely.
But a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Or you go to your nearest gas station, even though it's 12 cents more or something like that. And I think gas stations are an interesting example because there's tons of turnover. Gas stations are constantly changing hands, and prices are all over the place. Especially in big cities where you'll have areas where it's like $3.75 and then $5.20 in the next neighborhood.
Yeah, sure. Yes, to some degree, yeah. If that's all over the place, then yes. It's not like somebody's charging $10 though. And the other person's charging
all over the place within a range, but if we're capping it at like $7 in California, that's not that like a 1 to 7 range or 2 to 7.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, just to your point, right down my street, there's one that's like sells for like $3.50, and another one that sells for $4.50. It's like, why?
Right. It's crazy. Cities are like that, man. I know, it's so weird. LA was like that. I assume Chicago's like that.
Well, and so...
But I think they can do that because of the convenience, especially if they're on a side of the road that's easier to get to than the other side or something like that.
Yeah, but convenience doesn't necessarily lead to lower market rates. Then is this kind of what we're saying? Is that it's going to get people to not necessarily buy the cheapest thing?
I think the principle is any company is going to charge as much as they can.
Right.
The problem comes when there is a situation interfering with the valuation of that product. So if there's a product that's valuable that people want, a company is going to charge as much as they can. The company's not going to be benevolent. That's not what this is about. The companies are just going to become nice guys all of a sudden and charge less than they need to charge, or less than they want to charge, or something like that. It has to do with setting either price caps or price minimums, or setting rules about ways that you can and can't sell products, is going to interfere with both a company's ability to properly price a product and to properly stock a product. Because we've talked about this before, and we didn't read the Milton Friedman book, Free to Choose, but he talks about this, where he goes into price and how important price is as a method of communicating information about a product. But when there's regulation involved in a market, you don't know what price means. Price could mean that's just what the government says it is. And the problem with that is if it's too high or too low, it's going to mess up the ability to produce enough. If it's too high, you won't be able to make enough money off that product, and so likely companies will stop selling that product. And then it won't exist anymore, or it'll only exist in very small amounts. And like if the cost of producing it, not the cost of selling it. Because cost goes there's prices all the way through the market.
And if all the way down.
The cost is too low, they probably won't be able to produce enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, that all makes sense. And and honestly, I agree with, I think, basically everything.
Right. But that's all Friedman stuff. This is Rothbard. Right. He hates Friedman.
Right, I know. And I mean, and I don't want to rehash our old arguments about organization and everything like that and stuff. If people want to know, just go listen to the Anarchy episodes, and which are like the 8 points or the 9 point episodes.
I don't remember, something like that.
8.0,
in
9.0.
there.
Yeah. But, I always, the reason I'm going on this stability thing is because I guess you can also look at stability as, it's just always this question of what would we be giving up, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say that monetarily we do not have stability now.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's tough, because it seems like, and who knows if this is just because we are in the age that we live in, and so we only know what we know, but it does feel like even the 2008 recession wasn't as bad as the 1929 depression, which wasn't as bad as like past sort of, financial catastrophes. Like, history has been generally getting easier with certain things. I mean, it's not to say that you don't still have impoverished people, but like everybody's always saying,
I agree with what you're saying.
You don't have starvation to the degree that you had in the 1929, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're 100% right about that. I think. Obviously, I wasn't there, so it's all just history.
Sure, you weren't.
Sure.
I mean, even looking at the 1918 flu.
It's more that I think that I don't know. Yeah. My guess is we're headed closer to that direction than away from it.
Closer in which direction?
The starvation direction.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm that pessimistic. Even though I've come on here and said I think we're on the verge of World War III.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously anything can happen, so I'm not going to say that that's not the case.
You're right.
And
I don't know either. It's this thing where part of it is the way that I see it, because I remember during COVID, there was all like the checks and everything, and people were, some economists were warning about inflation, blah blah blah. And I had a conversation with somebody, this is like 2021, like mid 2021. And they're like, it seems like they're able to do this and there's not been that much inflation. It was like, yeah, well, let's give it 2 years and let's see what happens.
Right.
And now it's like a lot of inflation.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing with me. I had the same conversations because I was also freaking out about it. Because, it's just anybody paying attention would be.
But and then there's this other problem where I think this is actually similar to, I don't remember reading recently, maybe it was Nietzsche, about people being unwilling to see or say the truth or something like that. And, it's like you listen to Bill Maher and there was some clip of him talking about how wonderful the economy was. And there was a model on there who was like, wait, but what about the inflation? And he's like, what inflation?
Right.
And I have people in my life who I talk to about inflation and they're like, well, I don't like to talk conspiracy theories. And like, they don't like believe in inflation or something, which is like, I don't like what?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the problem is when I hear that and I talk to people like that, and then I think about who's writing history books, and I think the same thing when I read Rothbard. It's not like he's a disinterested party. I don't just read this and like believe everything he says about history. I'm interested in how he's casting the history. And I think I would not be super interested in reading Bill Maher's history of monetary policy in the U.S.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. It probably wouldn't be as exciting. And you know what? Honestly, I do see what you're saying. I have some of those same feelings of pessimism that, like, this isn't heading in the right direction. There's a lot more people who are homeless now than ever, right? And everything like that.
I think we're living in a weird version because certain things have gotten so cheap, there's no shortage of them.
Right.
Like there's no shortage of Doritos or something like that.
Right.
Like,
we can still
like
feed
really
with
poor quality
food. Yes.
goods are extremely cheap.
Yes.
And so calories are very cheap these days.
Yes.
Just calories, not nutrition. But.
Right. So, yeah, I think, you're right. It is weird. And it is probably a product of the financial system as stands.
But I kind of, that's what I read. When I read about the credit system, I think like Doritos and junk food, it feels to me like it's like cheap or free money is going to wind up being a problem. It's like, eating junk food all the time. It's like fine, kind of, when you're 15 and your body can handle it. But if you're still doing that when you're 38, like you're going to feel like crap. You're going to be sick all the time. You're probably going to be overweight.
Yeah. I mean, so what do you think of crypto? Do you think how does that play a role in the future for you?
What do I think of crypto? I like the idea. I personally have paranoid concerns about it.
Yeah, of course.
About who's running it.
Yeah, of course.
I like the idea. I like the idea of a free market of competing currencies.
Yeah.
And Rothbard gets at that a little bit when he's talking about systems where different banks and different state banks and different local banks would sometimes have their own currencies, sometimes share currencies in cartels, but there would be competing currencies, but they were all based on an ounce of gold.
Right.
And so that's where the gold standard thing is. And so where my question to Rothbard is, how do you ensure a gold standard without some kind of centralization of that rule? Because that feels like a centralized rule to me.
Yeah. No, I think it's just the fact he would probably say that it was already standardized de facto before, like nobody decided.
If it's not broken, don't fix it. Kind of.
Everybody was already doing it, and it was like the de facto thing. Right. It's probably the better question is like he was addressing here is how do you keep out silver?
Right.
Yeah, but which is what the Morgans, I think he said, were trying to do back in the day. Yeah, I don't know. So this is interesting, though, because to your point about how things are getting worse, could it be because we are uncoupling this system? Is that maybe when the system is intact and there is a centralized controller, you can have runaway inflation.
I would say that this problem predates crypto.
Well, hang on.
Yeah.
No. Well, I'm not talking about crypto.
Okay.
I'm talking about the economy. I'm talking about the fact that you can, as long as there is a central bank and the U.S. is because you were talking about you like the idea of competitive currencies, and I was going to ask you if you think right now that you have a free market of currencies within the global market of countries, and I feel like you would probably say no because again the dollar is the sort of standard, right? But we know that the BRICS nations are aggregating and forming a second block. So all of a sudden, you go from a unipolar to multi or bipolar at least world. And could this uncoupling of this centralized control that the U.S. has had since at least 48, but it was pretty good before then, in 1913. It wasn't, it's after World War I at least, right? Is that the reason? Is that why things are basically going bad? Is because it was working, but now we're taking it apart because the dollar is no longer going to be sort of the reserve currency for the world,
right?
And so that takes all of obviously our collateral, I guess you could say. The fact that everybody needed the trade in dollars is now gone, so that you don't need as many, that are going to be, that now you have more circulating, right?
Right.
So there's less of a demand.
I think it's very bad I think that system is very bad. The idea of, sorry, there's a fly. The idea of the U.S. currency losing its status on the global market is not good for U.S. citizens directly. But that's also because of the system that we have where we are not allowed to have even competing currencies within the U.S. So I'm not sure that I think that the reason things are going badly in the U.S. is because of the U.S. the U.S. dollar losing its stand on the global market. I'm sure that it has some effect, but I don't think that it was like all going great until the U.S. dollar started losing its place in the global market. Because as far as I understand it, it still has a very strong place in the global market.
Yes, no, it's
not like been kicked down to the bottom yet.
No,
and yes, it's true. The whole BRICS thing. To the question, do I think that national currencies compete with each other in a free way? I think in theory, kinda. Because I think actually in theory, states tend to interact with each other in a somewhat anarchic way.
Right. This was Locke's point, right?
Right. But
they're living in the state of nature.
The difference is, and this is a little bit conspiracy-y, so I don't know how much is sort of reasonable to say is true, but I think that there is a lot of, not just the U.S., but a lot of sort of foul play with respect to when there are countries that start developing strong currencies or start making alliances with other countries with strong currencies. It seems to me that the U.S. tends to like to go and kill them.
Yeah.
And so that's not a free market.
No, it's not. But
once you're killing people for not doing what you want, the free market thing is out of the question.
Yes.
So I agree. I agree that the U.S. dollar losing its place is bad for the U.S. economy. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that it losing its place is what is causing all of the problems.
Okay.
I think it's probably making inherent problems worse.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, your point is well taken that it's not like BRICS is completely up and running at
right. I think it's a threat in the future for
efficiency.
Sure.
Yeah, in the future it certainly is, but now it hasn't quite reached that. And no doubt, I mean, there's shadow forces that are playing on all countries right now, trying to destabilize them. Mm-hmm. You know, what with the retail or real estate crisis in China and, whatnot. Yeah, I was actually just talking to somebody from China the other day, and he was even candidly talking about how bad it was now. Yeah, which I was very surprised to hear him talk. Because honestly, what I found is talking to people from China is they don't want to talk about anything having to do even remotely with politics.
Interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. So all I'm trying to do here is, because I keep saying, I think I agree pretty much with you. And honestly, I agree with Rothbard in the general sense that the Federal Reserve probably wasn't completely necessary. It seems like it did exacerbate a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. But I also have a hard time, it's just so many fundamental changes occurred over the last 150 years. I'm trying to decouple what was the most important factor, maybe there isn't one, that caused the progression in quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think I'm sure that the injection of tons of money and credit and capital into the economy, as we talked about last week, in the short term has helped a lot. And then the question is, what does the short term mean with respect to economy and society? It can be kind of hard to gauge because if we're talking about the geological Earth, then we're talking in millions of years. And so what are short and long times when we're talking about economic growth and decline? And I actually don't have a good sense for that.
I'm just talking about if you look at any sort of, honestly, almost in any field, like you can look at population, you can look at sort of, I guess you could say, wealth,
right?
Just sizes of economy. Everything's exponential increase since the Industrial Revolution.
And where are you placing that?
What do you mean?
Where are you putting the Industrial Revolution?
Oh, end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. But probably coming in full steam 150 years ago in like the 1850s. When, here's the Thomas Sowell question. What's your what's your starting point, and why is that your starting point? Well, because
like if you go back further than that, what was happening?
Because it was an inflection point in not just what I'm talking about, but in basically other fields. That's where I feel like if you're trying to talk about grand changes, you need to look at multiple fields and see like what did all of these fields change around the same time, and if so, this was probably a significant thing. Like 1776 is a really interesting date, just generally. It's like a lot of things happened in 1776.
Right.
Outside of, you had Adam Smith published his Wealth of Nations that year. You have the Illuminati formed that year, by the way. I'm not even joking. You had obviously the American Revolution. I think David Hume died that year.
Nice.
Anyway, so just interesting how you do have regions. Obviously, that was just all coincidental, but you have...
Right. I mean, it's going to feel like a really strong inflection point to us because we're Americans. So the fact that the American Revolution lined up with those other things is going to feel more significant to us.
No, but you're not listening to me. This
Russia.
was. I gave you European examples too. I mean, you're right. American Revolution.
No, what I'm saying is we'll notice all the other things connected to it.
Sure, but Illuminati was in Germany. Come on.
Anyway.
The Freemasons. It came out of the Freemasons. Yeah. It was a real thing. Like it was. I'm not saying they control everything now, but it actually was a thing.
Which is most things.
Yes, sure. But anyway. No, so let me get back to your question. Why do I point to that era? Because also this is the same region that Foucault points to as well. And Nietzsche is like... Something happened in the end of the 18th, early 19th. You have the French revolutions, too. There you go. You're talking about specific times. Obviously, something was going on in France, too.
Right.
And then you had, Catherine the Great over in Russia was doing quite a lot in that era. Yeah. So a lot of stuff was going on, not just in America, in the 1770s and 80s and 90s.
Are you saying that thing might have been fractional reserve banking that did it?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that something was going on. So, because it was a combination of things. It was a philosophical shifts in thinking. Right. It was empiricism was now the new, I would say, major philosophical underpinning and driving the scientific revolution. Right. And you had a major. Atheism was becoming rampant for the first time. Right. Europe was the Enlightenment, right? Right. And so I just think that was a really important time for all those reasons. And so, but no, I don't know if, and yes, of course, then fractional reserve banking, insurance companies, all of these things. Those insurance companies came before, right? And even fractional reserve banking was in a form before that, but it did come in, I think, it became more and more prominent as time progressed until the 19th century when it was almost everywhere, right? Right. Like, I think the U.S. was the last major Western country to do it, and they started doing it in full force. It was in the Civil War, right? Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because it seems to me that fractional reserve banking is great when you need a lot of money that you don't have.
Yes.
That's what it's really, really good for.
Right. So for when you have a ton of, basically people inventing things and you have all these ideas, that's where it comes in really handy, which you had a lot of that.
When you need money, but you don't have time to build wealth.
Yes. But you have ideas, and you're like, I can build wealth if you give me some wealth. I can exponentially increase this wealth.
Right.
And for the most part, it happened. And so that's why I was pointing you to look at almost any domain you can look at, and it'll be exponential growth beginning. And that's the other reason why I'm pointing to this era, because if you just track it back,
so what do you mean by that?
Years,
I hear you, and I'm wondering what you're. Yeah.
Well, because we're talking about what is fractional reserve banking, it caused growth potentially.
You're right. So, when you say any domain you look at,
population, technological innovation, like inventions, number of inventions, wealth, just GDP of nations. Mm-hmm. This is a hypothesis. I haven't actually looked at this. Other than population, population's easy. Anybody can Google that, and you'll see it's exponential, and I think we all know that.
And it wasn't growing exponentially pre-1760.
I mean, no, it was probably logarithmic, if anything.
Sure, yeah. I don't know.
You had a big shoot up in the during Greece, and then it just stabilized.
Nice, yeah.
For a long time.
Because I'm always curious about what's happening before the starting point.
Well, no, that's the thing. Everything did just seem to take a lot longer for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it's just, you look at how long it took the Roman Empire to fall, and you look how long it's potentially taken the U.S. to fall, and it's like it took centuries for the Roman Empire to actually fall.
Right.
What's his face? Here's another. Gibbons. He also published his famous the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in 1776.
Nice.
So there you go, Antushka.
All right. Now don't tell me anything else. Nothing else could possibly have happened that year. That's it. Yeah. I think Rose Wilder Lane would probably attribute it to. She's talking about the freedom of people to be able to make their choices, and everything is downstream from there. And so fractional reserve banking is a scheme. And so are people free to sort of come up with get-rich-quick schemes? Or is everybody beholden to some traditional societal setup?
Yeah. Well, it's a question.
I think that it's one of those things where there's probably goods and bads that come with everything. And so, like, insurance as an industry, I see as like one of the more predatory industries that exists, playing on people's fears. But it's a great way to make some money. If you can get someone to be worried about something and then pay you for peace of mind, that's amazing. But that takes enough. I mean, it takes freedom of industry to be able to do that. You have to have the liberty to go and be selling things to people, selling ideas to people.
Mm. Yeah.
So you probably can't start an insurance industry in a communist country unless it already is entrenched.
Yes. Right. No, and I think that's the big other thing is that was going on that was probably potentially also related to why fractional reserve banking was created, but it was all the colonies that were going on. Right. You had a tremendous amount of new land that was, quote, discovered, right? And all of a sudden, you had just a bunch of more resources and ability to create more goods than you had 100 years before.
Right.
And to stimulate this and do it more quickly, because you're right, in some sense it is a get-rich-quick scheme. But acceleration isn't always bad. It's get-rich-quick, assuming that you can do it so that it doesn't, that has the connotation that it's a scam, but it doesn't have to be a scam if you actually are coming back and paying back whatever you're asking for, right?
Right. Are they, though? So that's the other question. Are the banks paying back what they're asking for? Because they're making a lot more money off of that money than we know.
Right. Well, no, and obviously, I mean, we have how many trillions, 30 plus trillions of debt, so obviously we're not paying everything back. But yeah, this becomes the question of, it becomes a problem when obviously the U.S. doesn't have its military capabilities and the dollar being the reserve currency. It's like once those two things are gone, the debt becomes a problem. But as long as those two things
as long as it's like you try and ask for your debt and we'll kill you.
Well, but it's true, though, because that's where the stability comes from.
Right. But what, this is crazy. This is like if I proposed that let's you and I start doing this thing where we start lending things to people based on things that we don't have.
It is crazy, but again, if we talk about from the state of nature, it's like if I have a bigger gun and you want my money, or you want your money, and I don't want to give you the money, then I don't have to give you the money.
It's true that it's the state of nature, but that doesn't make it a reasonable way to live.
Well, it doesn't make it moral. I think that's the problem, right? Yeah.
Right. Like, at that point, why not just have slaves? Like, what are we? Who are we kidding?
Well, and this is why the U.S. has lost the moral high ground in almost every domain, right?
Right. Well, some people think that we have it. I don't know.
Well, yes, but I should have said my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I can get on board with the idea that fractional reserve banking and a strong military are not without their benefits, but the gains are not morally or ethically achieved.
Yes. And then we get back to philosophy finally. What are morals and ethics, Antushka?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I also thought the little tidbit about how Jackson and Jefferson were the only two presidents to pay off the debt is pretty fun. It's also interesting the political history he was talking about the parties, because that's actually how I learned it when I was in middle school.
I think didn't Clinton balance the debt?
No, he had a surplus. He didn't pay off the debt.
Oh, he had a surplus. Okay.
Yeah, we still had debt.
Okay.
It was that the balance sheet was zero under Jefferson and Jackson.
I see.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Surplus is nice. I like it, but
yeah. Well, it's just saying that because Rothbard he died in 95, so he may not have even seen that.
Yeah. I think a lot of libertarian economists attribute that to some trick, and surpluses don't matter to them very much. But.
Yeah. No, I kind of agree.
I think it's fair to credit him with it, though. You know.
Right. Yeah.
I'd go back to Clinton world rather than now.
I credit Monica Lewinsky personally.
Yeah,
it's just me.
But what's funny is when I was in middle school in 8th grade, civics and U.S. history, the way we learned it was what Rothbard said, and it's all changed now. Because he talks about how the Republican Party comes out of the Whig Party, and the Federalist Party that Hamilton was a part of is essentially the precursor to what we think of as the modern Republican Party.
Right.
But that's all shifted because now Hamilton's this like hero of the left.
Yeah.
For some weird reason. And then the Southern Democratic Republican Party is the precursor to what we call the Democratic Party, which for some reason nobody wants that on them. But it's this thing where they were much smaller government at the time, and they were like, it's the history of slavery in the South and all that stuff. And that is the Democratic Party. The South is traditionally a Democratic area, and then things started shifting.
It was during the civil rights when it shifted, I'm pretty sure.
I think it shifted before the progressive movement in like the 1910s.
Oh, really? Because I thought there was a big
shift. Because that
shift.
was the progressive movement took over the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party then became much, much bigger government.
Oh, I'm talking about when the Southerners became Republicans.
Oh,
I thought that was in the 60s.
Right. Because I think the political shift in the party, where the party started to swing,
Yeah.
To be much, because the Republicans have always been kind of big government. It's this weird thing where they're like big spending, big control, big government, but not too far. And then the progressives are like, yeah, let's go way further than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Democrats were still anti-civil rights up until the 60s. Because like Eisenhower signed the first Civil Rights Act in the 50s, and the Democrats all voted against it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man.
It's weird. But I feel like it's all that history. This is where like history is weird. I think that history is all changed in the last 10 years.
Been reinterpreted?
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
because now the history is that Jefferson is the history of the Republican Party. And that Hamilton is this bastion of early progressivism.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think Jefferson... I don't remember people really talking about Hamilton, good or bad. But I do agree. I mean, certainly the musical was like a big raising him up.
Yeah. When we talked about it in 8th grade, Hamilton was like wanted to establish a national bank. That's what we... That was like what we had to know about him on the test.
Gotcha. See, I don't even remember. I mean, I took the same test, right? Because we all had to take that test. I just remember having to memorize the Constitution. Right. I think that's as far as I went.
Nice.
I passed it. Yeah. Yeah, no, but that is interesting that it switched. You're right. And we'll see what happens. I mean, crazy things are happening with the party now. So we'll see. I feel like this is another moment that people are going to point to and be like, this is when major ideological shifts occurred in the parties. I mean, people already say that. They're like, I was a liberal 20 years ago, and now I'm center right. You know.
Yeah.
So
where do you feel like the biggest shifts are happening?
Like in what party?
Yeah, like what do the ideological shifts? Because to me, the center has stayed the same for the last like 40 years.
Yes. No, I think it's just the fringes have become probably louder and more emboldened. That's really all it is.
Right.
Which maybe brings us to what I was going to talk about at the beginning.
Oh.
But I don't know. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about this section?
No, I think it's fine.
Yeah. No, I thought that was good, though.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm trying to think about what to read next. And do I have some spicy stuff.
Ooh. Oh, that's exciting. I was like, more Socrates.
No. So one option was I bring us back to Foucault. He has a book called The History of Sexuality.
Oh, yeah. I love it so far.
Yeah, so I've been reading through this, and
by yourself at night.
Yeah, it's actually not like provocative at all or anything like that, but it's just interesting because it's definitely helping me clarify what his point is. Because his point is similar to the point he's making in Madness and Civilization. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. And we can, if we talk about it, or if we read it, we can talk about it more. But that led me to this other crazy book. I'm not suggesting that we read, by the way. This is just something that... this is just... I don't even know. This is the thing I might cut out.
No, don't cut it. It's good.
So in this book that Foucault references... or that Foucault writes, he references this. Basically, it's a pornographic memoir from the Victorian age, published in like 1866 by an anonymous guy. But it's like 1,500 pages. It's like 11 volumes, and supposedly it is he was just a lecherous Victorian gentleman, and he just basically wrote down all of his escapades from the beginning that he could remember.
I mean, that's pretty fun.
It's crazy. So I did read that. Sorry,
the whole thing?
No. But I read parts of it because I was like, well, how graphic are we getting? And I was astounded, to be quite frank.
You were like blushing. You're like, oh my.
I was like, I hope I can't have this up at like a coffee shop.
It's that much, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, and also, it made me realize that the C word and the F word they go back
Old. Nice.
to then. I mean, he was using the C word to often. That was how he was referring to a vagina. And
so that's what it means.
Yeah. No, there were lots of vocabulary words that I was like, oh, I didn't. Buggering. Now I know what that means. By the way, if anybody looks up My Secret Life, viewer discretion is advised, and whatever other legalese needs to be 18, etc., etc.
So this is a multiple volume book.
Yeah, it's
the
crazy, man.
Sexuality.
Yeah, did you look it up? Oh, History of Sexuality is not multi-volume. This memoir.
See 3 volumes.
Oh, yes. Oh, it is. I'm sorry, you're right. Yes, I'm just reading the first volume.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Sorry. But also, the My Secret Life is also multiple.
Okay, what's it called? My Secret Life?
My Secret Life, a memoir or something like that. Just write Victorian My Secret Life.
Okay.
You'll get it, man. You and your wife will be reading this later.
It's like...
But I took a peek at it because I was just like curious, mostly. No, but it is really interesting. You're like, what the hell were people in the Victorian age doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is this weird to talk about publicly?
No, actually, it supports my idea that the past isn't as different. We're not as separate from it as we think we are.
It's not. And so there's a lot
It's like the thing when you look at ancient Roman society and there's evidence of blowjobs and stuff like that. It's like they're doing all the same stuff we're doing.
Yes.
They're just people.
Which is amazing when you think about how just less people showered.
I know. I think it must have smelled. Hey, dude, the 70s.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
That was so smelly.
I know. And he even, because again, what I did was he has chapter headings where he talks about everything that he's going to talk about in the chapter. So I just went through and I read the headings. Yeah, basically, he puts one word or few word summaries in bold at the beginning of the chapters. Nice. He has a whole thing about smell. I didn't read it, but yeah, that would be interesting to read. It's what was he thinking? But it's also it's crazy because dude's not a good guy. I mean, yeah. Not a good guy. Nice. But he also, he gets molested at an early age. He recounts, and stuff like that. And, yeah. Anyway. So yeah, very interesting. And so, yeah, if you want to read that, that's a good point. I forgot that it was multi-volume, The History of Sexuality.
Well, we just started.
Yeah. So you'd be interested in doing that?
That sounds great.
Okay. Lots
Foucault.
of
Hopefully it's slightly easier than that last one, but I bet it
honestly it is. Yeah. That was the other thing. I don't know if it's my translation too, so I'll tell you the translation I have because it's much more readable. Much more readable. It's still not easy because it's Foucault, but it's also a later book. Like I had said that we read, that was his PhD, so he was still kind of green. Yeah, I don't know. Cool. It's interesting because it's I found this and I found it really interesting and I wanted to talk to people. I was like, who can I talk to about this? Because it is it's pornographic, but it's it's also historical in a way.
Is it by Walter? Is that it?
That's, I think, they don't know who, there's theories about
by
if
Walter
you read the Wikipedia.
in quotes.
Yes, it's I think he might call himself Walter in it or something as a pseudonym. I don't remember.
Okay, explicit sexual encounters.
Yes. No, very explicit. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, when I was reading, I was like, is this illegal? I looked up. It was banned for a long time, but it is legal.
Nice. I got it.
Oh boy.
Wow, it's long. So, what the hell?
That's what I told you. It's 11 volumes.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's his whole life.
He just keeps writing it down.
Yeah.
Even when it's boring, he just...
Well, I don't know. Is it ever boring, Antushka?
Oh, I see. Okay, I got the keywords. He's social media pre. That's nice. He's got some hashtags up top.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you're seeing what I'm talking. Yeah, it's ridiculous, man. See what I mean? I don't even know if we should be talking about this. You think this is an issue?
My godfather was very fond of me, is how it starts.
Oh, God. I don't think that goes where you think it's going to go, though. I think I read that part. Yeah. But yeah, it is funny, phrased. Yeah. So anyway, okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a show in 2 days.
Oh yeah. Is
this going to be out?
Yeah. I'll edit it tonight.
Okay. We got a show Friday, March 15th at Dog and Bone in Dripping Springs. Our glorious return because I had to cancel the last one.
Yeah.
I'm an idiot. And then we got another show in May, on May 3rd at Celis Brewery in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
There's all Austin gigs. We got to get some Houston gigs too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down. Cool. Yeah, no, it'll be fun. It's going to be fun on the bun.
Yep.
Covers, originals. It's all good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think you'll post this on Reddit?
If I have time. I might actually have time tomorrow. We'll see.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Cool.
Sweet.
Well, see you in a couple days.
Yep. See you.